"You are destroying my legacy," she shrieked, her voice cracking like thin ice over a deep, dark lake. Her face was a twisted mask of fury, blotchy and red under the harsh fluorescent lights of the community center. At that moment, with the eyes of the entire neighborhood on us and 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies standing by the door, I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound, almost serene sense of satisfaction. Because I knew she wasn't talking about the pristine, award-winning golf course she managed with an iron fist. She was talking about the house of cards I had just meticulously, and very publicly, pulled the foundation out from under. My name is Mark, and I'm a civil engineer. Specifically, my career has been in water resource management. I deal with dams, levees, irrigation canals, and floodplains. It's a world of quiet calculations, of respecting the immense power of nature and guiding it with precision and care. It's not a job for loud, impulsive people. It's a job for patient men. I learned that patience not just from my work, but from my late wife, Clara. She was the artist, the one who saw beauty where I saw hydrostatic pressure and soil erosion coefficients. When she passed 2 years ago, the silence in our house became a physical presence. To fill that silence, I poured myself into finishing the project she had started, the garden. And the centerpiece of that garden, the final touch she had designed but never got to see built, was a fence. It wasn't just any fence. It was a beautiful, handcrafted cedar split-rail fence, low enough to be neighborly but distinct enough to frame the riot of color from her rose bushes and lavender beds. It was a monument to her, a final piece of her artistry I could bring to life. Our home was in Lakeside Vistas, a community that prided itself on manicured lawns and a peaceful, orderly existence. It was the kind of place people moved to for the quiet. I had cherished that quiet. But the quiet in Lakeside Vistas came with a gatekeeper. Her name was Brenda. Brenda was the president of our homeowners association, a position she wielded not like a public servant, but like a feudal lord. She was a woman whose entire identity seemed to be constructed from a deep-seated belief that rules were for other people to follow and for her to create, enforce, and ignore at her whim. Our first interaction had been trivial. A notice on my door, printed in an aggressive scarlet font, informing me that my recycling bin was visible from the street for a duration exceeding the 45 minutes post-collection, a violation of Bylaw 117, subsection C. I paid the $25 fine without a word. I just wanted peace. But with Brenda, peace was never an option. She fed on conflict like a carrion bird. The fence was what truly brought her into my orbit. I had submitted the plans, as required. They were professionally drafted, conforming to every single height, material, and setback requirement in the HOA's ridiculously thick Book of Covenants. I received the stamped approval in the mail a month later. The day the posts went in, her black luxury SUV crawled to a stop in front of my house. She rolled down the window, oversized sunglasses hiding her eyes but not the deep scowl etched on her face. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's the fence you approved, Brenda," I said calmly, holding up the signed permit. "I approved a fence," she sniffed, "not this rustic monstrosity. It obstructs the view." "The view of what?" "My hydrangeas." "The view of the golf course from the street," she snapped. Her golf course. That's how everyone referred to it. The Lakeside Vistas Golf Club was technically owned by the HOA, but it was Brenda's personal fiefdom. She micromanaged everything from the grain of the sand in the bunkers to the brand of gin served at the clubhouse. It was her pride, her joy, her seat of power. My property backed up to the 14th hole. The fence, a mere 3 feet high, was a good 100 yards from the fairway. The idea that it obstructed any meaningful view was absurd. "The plans clearly showed the location and style," I said, keeping my voice even. "It's fully compliant." "I am rescinding my approval," she declared, as if she were a queen issuing a royal decree. "Take it down." She rolled up her window and sped off, leaving a puff of self-righteous exhaust in her wake. That was the beginning. I, of course, did not take it down. The next day, the official notices started. First, a formal warning, then, a $100 fine. Then, a $200 fine. Each letter was more threatening than the last, filled with legal-sounding jargon that was pure intimidation. I responded to each one with a polite, registered letter containing a copy of her signed approval and a reference to the specific bylaw I was in compliance with. I was playing by the rules. I thought logic and reason would prevail. How naive I was. Brenda didn't operate on logic. She operated on power. The harassment escalated. She started posting about my illegal structure on the community's official social media page, painting me as a rogue homeowner intent on destroying property values. Neighbors I'd known for years started to avoid my gaze. They were afraid of her, and I couldn't blame them. She had a history of making life miserable for anyone who crossed her. I tried to talk to other board members, but they were her puppets, nodding along in meetings and rubber-stamping her every decision. The community was her kingdom, and they were her terrified subjects. I felt isolated, a small island against a rising tide of petty tyranny. But the fence was more than just wood and nails to me. It was Clara's last sketch. Every time I looked at it, I saw her smiling, pencil in hand, imagining the way the evening sun would catch the grain of the cedar. Taking it down felt like a betrayal. So I held my ground. That was my mistake. I underestimated the depths of her venom. The turning point, the moment this stopped being a dispute and started being a war, came on a Tuesday morning. I had an early meeting on site for a new reservoir project an hour away. I left just after dawn, the sky a soft gray promise of the day to come. When I returned that afternoon, something was wrong. The air felt different. I pulled into my driveway and my heart seized in my chest. It was gone. The fence was gone. Not just disassembled. It was obliterated. Splintered rails lay scattered across my wife's flower beds. Deep, muddy tracks from a small bulldozer or skid steer had churned her meticulously tended roses into a brown, tragic mess. The earth was scarred. My wife's garden, our sanctuary, looked like a battlefield. I stood there, staring at the wreckage, a cold, silent rage building inside me. It was a rage so pure and so deep it felt like it was freezing my blood. This wasn't about a view anymore. This wasn't about a bylaw. This was a violation. She had crossed a line. She had come onto my property and destroyed something precious to me, a memorial to my wife. She had bulldozed the last piece of Clara I had left to build. In that moment, the patient, peace-seeking engineer died. Something else was born. Something methodical, something cold, and something utterly committed to justice. Brenda had made a critical error. She thought I was just another timid homeowner she could bully into submission. She didn't understand that my entire professional life was about understanding systems, finding their weaknesses, and applying precise pressure until they yielded. And I was about to turn my full professional attention to the system that was Brenda. My first call was to my neighbor, Frank. Frank was a retired police detective, a man who had seen the worst of humanity and had come out the other side with a cynical sense of humor and an unshakable moral compass. He was at my property line in minutes, his face grim as he surveyed the damage. "Call the sheriff," he said, his voice low and hard. "Don't touch anything. This is a crime scene." While we waited, he walked the perimeter with me. "She hired a crew," he mused, pointing to the professional-grade tracks. "This wasn't some amateur job. She paid for this." The sheriff's deputy was young, polite, and clearly out of his depth. He took my statement, photographed the damage, and gave me a report number. "Honestly, mister," he said with a sigh, "these HOA disputes get nasty. Without a witness who saw her direct the crew, it's your word against hers." I knew he was right. Brenda would deny everything. She would say it was a rogue contractor, a misunderstanding. She would bury me in legal fees until I gave up. That was her way. But I wasn't going to play her game. I was going to build a new one. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my study, the room where Clara and I had planned our future, and I began to work. The first phase was investigation. I wasn't looking for proof that she destroyed my fence. That was a battle. I was looking for the ammunition to win a war. I started with the HOA itself. I spent hours online, digging through the county's public records portal. I pulled the original plat maps for the Lakeside Vistas development, dating back to the late 1980s. I downloaded every version of the HOA covenants and bylaws I could find. I cross-referenced everything, building a timeline of the community's legal and physical development. My engineer's brain kicked in, seeing the community not as a collection of houses, but as a system. A system of rules, properties, and infrastructure. And every system has stress points. Every system has vulnerabilities. I found the first one around 3 a.m. It was a small note on the original 1988 survey map. A dotted line running right through the back of my property, labeled, Historic Drainage Easement. It was an old designation, from before the development was built, referring to a natural swale that once carried rainwater from the surrounding hills down to the lake. According to the map's legend, the easement granted my property certain inalienable water rights. My heart began to beat a little faster. I dug deeper, pulling county water board records. The development of lakeside vistas, and specifically the golf course, had been approved on the condition that these historic drainage patterns were respected. The developer had built a series of culverts and storm drains to manage the flow, rerouting the water around the new fairways and into a series of artificial ponds on the golf course. Those ponds were the primary source of irrigation for the greens. I pulled up the satellite imagery, toggling between the current view and historical photos. And then I saw it. Sometime in the last 10 years, right around the time Brenda took over the HOA and began her beautification of the golf course, the main culvert that was supposed to channel water from the easement into the pond system had been filled in. It had been replaced by a much smaller, insufficient pipe. The vast majority of the storm runoff was now being illegally diverted directly into the lake, while the golf course ponds were being topped up from the municipal water supply. A supply paid for by every single homeowner in the HOA through their dues. Brenda wasn't just managing a golf course. She was running a scam. She had altered a critical piece of infrastructure, violating county regulations and the founding covenants of the community, all to keep her precious golf course looking green at the expense of everyone else. And the nexus of that entire illegal system, the legal linchpin of the original water rights, was the historic easement that ran directly through the patch of ground where my wife's roses used to be. The ground she had just bulldozed. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. In her quest to open the view, she had inadvertently pointed me directly to her greatest vulnerability. This was no longer about a fence. This was about a flagrant abuse of power, environmental violations, and financial fraud. My path forward became crystal clear. I wasn't going to sue her for the fence. That was thinking too small. I was going to use my knowledge, my skills as a civil engineer, to enforce my property's legal water rights. I was going to reclaim what was mine. And if doing so happened to starve her precious golf course of its illegally obtained water and expose her entire fraudulent operation, well, that would be a poetic consequence. The next morning, I began Phase 2, the strategic plan. I called it the Clara Memorial Garden Restoration and Water Reclamation Project. It sounded official. It sounded boring. It was perfect. First, I filed for a permit with the county. Not the HOA. The county. My application was for significant landscaping and drainage remediation on my property to restore a pre-existing natural watercourse as per the 1988 plat survey. I attached copies of the original maps, the easement records, and a detailed hydrological plan that I had drafted myself. The plan involved excavating the old swale on my property and installing a French drain system that would collect the runoff. This water would then be channeled into a beautiful, stone-lined retention pond right where the bulldozer had done the most damage. The pond, of course, would be surrounded by a new, much more robust fence. And, crucially, any overflow from my new pond would be directed, via a new, properly sized culvert, exactly where the original plans dictated it should go, into the golf course's irrigation ponds. I was, on paper, simply fixing the problem Brenda had created. I was restoring the proper, legal flow of water. Of course, what the paperwork didn't say was that by asserting my right to collect the water on my property first, I would effectively be putting a chokehold on the golf course's main water supply. I would control the floodgates. While the county processed my permit, I began setting the trap. I installed a series of high-definition, motion-activated security cameras. They were small, discreet, and positioned to cover every angle of my backyard, my property line, and the street in front of my house. I wanted a complete record of everything that was about to happen. Frank, my retired detective neighbor, gave me some pointers. Make sure the timestamp is visible and accurate, he advised. And get a sign. Something simple. Private property. 24-hour video surveillance in use that eliminates any expectation of privacy and makes the footage ironclad in court. I had one made that afternoon. The county permit came through in 2 weeks. They were thrilled. My project would actually alleviate some of the stormwater runoff issues they'd been having with the lake. I had legally leapfrogged the HOA. Brenda had no jurisdiction over a county-approved water management project. The day the surveyor's truck arrived to stake out the excavation lines, her black SUV appeared like a bad omen. She stormed up my driveway, her face a thundercloud. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed, waving a hand at the small wooden stakes. "This is my new garden project," I said, my voice calm and pleasant. "The Clara Memorial Garden Restoration and Water Reclamation Project. You can't do this. All projects must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee." "That's for aesthetic changes, Brenda," I said, holding up my county permit. "This is a structural and environmental remediation project under the authority of the County Water Board. It's a bit above the HOA's pay grade." The look on her face was a mixture of confusion and pure rage. She was a bully who had only ever had to punch down. She had no idea how to handle someone who wasn't playing by her rigged rules. "I will have my lawyers put a stop to this," she shrieked. "You do that," I said. "They can send any correspondence to my lawyer. And be careful not to trespass. As the sign says, you're on camera." I pointed to the new, shiny sign on a post by my driveway. She glanced at it, then back at me, her eyes narrowing into slits. She was a cornered animal, and I knew she was about to get vicious. The next day, a small backhoe arrived. The operator, a burly man named Gus, was professional and efficient. He started carefully excavating the path for the new drainage system. Brenda's reaction was predictable. That evening, the first official HOA cease and desist order was taped to my door. It was full of empty threats and cited bylaws that had no relevance to the situation. I filed it neatly in a folder labeled Evidence. The next day, Brenda escalated. She stood on the edge of her precious 14th fairway, just on the other side of my property line, and screamed at Gus and his crew. She called them vandals. She threatened to have their business license revoked. Gus, to his credit, just put on a pair of noise-canceling headphones and kept working. My cameras recorded the entire tirade. That night, the trap sprung. My phone buzzed with a notification from the security system just after 2 a.m. I watched the live feed on my tablet. A figure, cloaked in darkness, was creeping into my backyard. The figure was carrying a can of something. They moved to the backhoe, which Gus had parked neatly by the excavation site, and began spraying something on the engine. It was Brenda. Even in the grainy night vision, her self-righteous posture was unmistakable. She was attempting to sabotage the equipment. She thought she was being clever, acting under the cover of darkness. She had no idea she was the star of her own little incriminating movie. I saved the footage, backed it up to 3 different cloud services, and sent a copy to Frank. His reply was immediate: felony vandalism. We've got her. But I wasn't ready to go to the police yet. That was just for property damage. I was after the whole rotten enterprise. The next morning, Gus called me. "Mark, someone put sugar in my fuel tank," he said, his voice tight with anger. "And they cut the hydraulic lines. This is thousands of dollars in damage." "I know, Gus," I said calmly. "And I know who did it. Don't worry, I will cover every cent of the repairs. Send me the invoice." I now had her on camera committing a felony. It was time for the first reveal. The next scheduled HOA meeting was in a week. The agenda, which Brenda circulated via email, included a special item, addressing the road construction and environmental destruction at Lot 114. That was me. She was planning a public shaming. Perfect. I spent the week preparing my presentation. I didn't just have the video. I had maps, charts, and a full hydrological report. I had copies of the county permits, the original plat surveys, and the relevant sections of the state water code. I arrived at the community center that evening and took a seat in the back row. The room was packed. Brenda had clearly whipped the community into a frenzy. I could feel the hostile stares. She started the meeting with her usual condescending preamble, then launched into her attack on me. She called me a menace, a rule breaker who was endangering the aesthetic harmony of lakeside vistas. She claimed my unapproved and dangerous excavation was causing irreparable harm to the community's crown jewel, the golf course. She finished with a flourish, demanding the board vote to impose the maximum possible fine and issue a lien against my property. "Thank you, Brenda," I said, standing up from the back of the room. That was a very creative presentation. I'd like to offer a brief rebuttal. Before she could object, I walked to the front of the room and plugged my laptop into the projector. "Brenda is correct about one thing," I began, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "There is a serious issue of environmental destruction happening in our community. But it's not coming from my property." I clicked to the first slide. It was the 1988 plat map, with the historic drainage easement clearly highlighted in red. As you can see, the original design of this community included a crucial drainage system. My property contains the legal easement for that system. I clicked again. A side-by-side satellite photo appeared. One from 2008, showing the culvert. One from today, showing it filled with earth and covered in sod. Sometime in the last decade, this system was illegally altered. The water that should be flowing into the golf course irrigation ponds is now being diverted, causing erosion and polluting the lake. The golf course, meanwhile, is being irrigated with municipal water, water we all pay for in our HOA dues. A murmur went through the crowd. People started looking at each other, then at their water bills. "My project," I continued, my voice steady, "is a county-approved effort to correct this illegal alteration and restore the proper flow of water, as required by law." Brenda was on her feet, her face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "This is slander. It's preposterous. He has no proof." "Oh, but I do have proof of some things," I said, my voice dropping. "For instance, I have proof of who is so desperate to stop this legal, approved project that they would resort to felony vandalism." I clicked to the final slide. The video started to play. The room was plunged into a dead, shocked silence, broken only by the sound of crickets from the security camera's microphone. We all watched the grainy, night vision footage of our HOA president, Brenda, creeping through my backyard and disabling a piece of heavy machinery. When the video ended, you could have heard a pin drop. Brenda stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape. The color had drained from her face. She had been utterly, completely exposed. Her reaction was not one of remorse or shame. It was pure, undiluted rage. "This is an invasion of privacy. It's illegal. I will sue you into oblivion," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "The camera was on my own property, Brenda," I said calmly. "And there was a sign clearly posted. It's perfectly legal evidence. Evidence which I have already forwarded to the sheriff's department and the contractor's insurance company." The social credibility she had so carefully cultivated for years evaporated in that instant. The looks from the other homeowners were no longer hostile towards me. They were a mixture of shock, disgust, and daunting realization, all directed at her. But she still held the power. She slammed her gavel down. "This meeting is adjourned," she yelled, and stormed out of the room, her terrified board members scrambling in her wake. I had won the battle of public opinion. But the war was far from over. Brenda was wounded, but not defeated. And I knew her retaliation would be swift and vicious. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. It was the calm before the storm. The work on my property continued. Gus's backhoe was repaired, and he was back on the job, now with a renewed sense of purpose. He'd seen the video. Then, the storm broke. It started with a call from my boss, the head of my engineering firm. "Mark," he said, his voice grave. "I just received a very disturbing anonymous letter. It makes some serious accusations about you. Falsifying credentials, taking kickbacks from contractors. It even suggests you're an environmental hazard." My blood ran cold. "It's Brenda," I said instantly. "The HOA president I told you about." "I figured as much," he said. "Don't worry, I know it's garbage. But she also sent it to the State Engineering Board and the EPA. You're going to have to deal with the official inquiries." It was a classic smear campaign. She was trying to destroy my professional reputation, to get me fired. She was trying to take away my livelihood. But that wasn't the worst of it. The next day, a car from Child Protective Services pulled up to my house. My heart hammered against my ribs. I didn't have children. Clara and I were never able to. A kind but firm social worker explained that they had received an anonymous tip. A tip alleging that I was a danger to the neighborhood children, that I had an unsecured and dangerous construction site that was an attractive nuisance. The accusation was vile, a thinly veiled attempt to paint me as some kind of predator. It was the lowest of blows. She had crossed another line, a line I didn't even know existed. She was no longer just a bully. She was a monster. The social worker inspected my fully fenced, fully permitted, and entirely safe work site, apologized for the intrusion, and left. But the poison of the accusation lingered in the air. I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun set, feeling a weariness that went bone deep. This had gone too far. I was fighting a woman who had no morals, no decency, no bottom. Just as I was sinking into despair, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Is this Mark?" a nervous voice asked. "Yes." "Who is this?" "My name is Arthur. Arthur Jensen. I'm the treasurer for the Lakeside Vistas HOA." I sat up straight. Arthur was one of Brenda's loyal lieutenants, a meek little man who always looked terrified of his own shadow. "What can I do for you, Arthur?" I asked, my voice cautious. "I saw what you presented at the meeting," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "About the water. You're right. It's worse than you think." He took a shaky breath. "She's been cooking the books for years. The invoices for the municipal water, the contractor who filled in the culvert. It's all a scam. She's getting kickbacks. Huge ones. This was it. This was the final piece. The whistleblower. Why are you telling me this, Arthur?" "Because I have a family," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't go to prison for her. After you showed that video, I realized it's all going to come out. I just want to be on the right side of it when it does. I have copies. Of everything. Invoices, bank statements, her private emails with the contractor." He had the final, undeniable proof. The smoking gun. We arranged to meet the next day in a coffee shop 2 towns over. He slid a thick manila envelope across the table to me. His hands were trembling. "She'll ruin me if she finds out," he whispered. "She won't," I promised. "You're doing the right thing, Arthur. You're going to be the witness that saves this community." I spent that night poring over the documents. It was all there, a clear and damning trail of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. She hadn't just rerouted the water. She had created a fake company, billed the HOA exorbitant amounts for the extra water and maintenance, and funneled the money into an offshore account. The contractor she hired to do the illegal work was her cousin. She wasn't just a tyrant. She was a common criminal. Armed with Arthur's documents, the video evidence, my own hydrological survey, and a detailed timeline of her harassment campaign, I was finally ready to end this. My next stop wasn't the local sheriff. It was the district attorney's office. I laid the entire case out for a sharp-eyed prosecutor in the white-collar crime division. She listened intently, her expression growing more and more grim as I walked her through the evidence. When I was finished, she looked at the mountain of paper on her desk, then back at me. "Mister," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "you've just handed me a case on a silver platter. We're opening a full investigation. Grand jury subpoenas will be going out by the end of the week." The wheels of justice were finally turning. But I had one more thing to do. I wanted to make sure her downfall wasn't just a quiet legal proceeding. It needed to be public. The community she had terrorized needed to see her unmasked. I used the HOA's own bylaws against her. I drafted a petition, citing a clause that allowed homeowners to call a special emergency meeting, if signed by 25% of the residents. The topic of the meeting, a forensic audit of the HOA's financial and infrastructure management. I walked door to door. After the last meeting, people were no longer afraid. They were angry. I got the signatures in a single afternoon. By law, Brenda was forced to schedule the meeting. She set it for the following Wednesday, no doubt planning to use the time to prepare her defense and spin her lies. She had no idea what was coming. I coordinated with the DA's office. They agreed to let the meeting play out. They would have investigators there, plainclothed, to observe. The final showdown was set. The night of the special meeting, the community center was overflowing. People were standing in the back, lining the walls. There was a crackle of anticipation in the air. This wasn't just an HOA meeting. It was a reckoning. Brenda and her board sat at the front table, looking beleaguered but defiant. She tried to control the proceedings, but the crowd was restless. I had arranged to be the first speaker. I walked to the podium, not with a laptop this time, but with a single, thick binder. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and strong. "We are here tonight to discuss the integrity of our community's leadership. We've all been paying exorbitant dues for years, believing we were paying for pristine landscaping and community services." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. "I'm here to show you what you were really paying for." I opened the binder. Systematically, page by page, I dismantled her reign. I started with the water. I showed the maps, explained the illegal diversion, and presented a detailed calculation of how much money had been spent on municipal water to compensate for the engineered shortfall. The number was staggering. Then I moved to the fraud. This illegal work was performed by a company called Green Pastures Landscaping, I said, projecting a copy of an invoice onto the screen. A company that, according to state records, was founded 2 weeks before the work began and whose registered agent is Brenda's first cousin. Gasps rippled through the room. And where did the payments to this company go? I continued, clicking to the next slide. Not to a business account. They went here. A bank statement for an offshore account in the Cayman Islands appeared on the screen. The account was in Brenda's name. The room erupted. People were yelling, shouting questions, pointing at Brenda. She was white as a sheet, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape. "These are forgeries," she screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "Lies. This man is a criminal trying to deflect from his own violations." "Is that so, Brenda?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Then perhaps you can explain these." I projected her emails with her cousin, the ones Arthur had given me. Emails where they discussed the scheme in detail, arguing over the percentage of the kickback. The evidence was absolute. It was undeniable. Her entire world was collapsing around her in real time, in front of the very people she had spent years intimidating. And then, it happened. The public meltdown. "You have no right," she shrieked, rising from her chair, her body trembling with a rage that bordered on insanity. "I built this community. I made it what it is. The golf course is perfect. It's my legacy. I did what I had to do to protect it from people like you." It was a confession. A full, public confession, delivered at maximum volume. As her tirade reached its peak, the doors at the back of the room opened. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies, the same ones from the climax of my story's intro, stepped inside. They were followed by 2 plainclothed detectives from the DA's office. The room fell silent. The detectives walked calmly to the front of the room, directly to the podium where Brenda was still sputtering. "Brenda," one of them said, his voice calm but firm. "You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." The look on her face was something I will never forget. It was a supernova of shock, denial, and utter, impotent fury. As they cuffed her, her head swiveled and her eyes locked on me. "You," she hissed, the word dripping with venom. "You'll regret this. I will destroy you." It was her last, hollow threat. Everyone in that room knew she was finished. As they led her away, a stunned silence held for a moment, and then, slowly, a single person began to clap. Then another, and another, until the entire room was filled with a thunderous, cathartic applause. The reign of the HOA tyrant was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Brenda's case was a slam dunk for the prosecution. Faced with the mountain of evidence and Arthur's testimony, she took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. The civil suits followed. The HOA, under new management, sued her to reclaim the embezzled funds. Gus's company sued her for the damages to his equipment. I sued her personally for the destruction of my property. By the time it was all over, she was financially ruined, her assets seized to pay the judgments. She lost her house, her car, her precious golf club membership. She lost everything. The community began to heal. An interim board was appointed, with Frank, my retired cop neighbor, as the chair. They immediately undid Brenda's draconian rules. The scarlet font violation notices disappeared. A sense of freedom and neighborliness returned to lakeside vistas. The golf course was shut down for several months while the illegal infrastructure was removed and the proper drainage system was restored, all under my professional supervision, pro bono. The HOA's water bills dropped by 60%. As for me, I finished my project. The small pond in my backyard became a beautiful water feature, teeming with lily pads and small fish. I rebuilt the fence, exactly to Clara's specifications. It stood proud and strong, a testament not just to her memory, but to the quiet resilience of a patient man who had been pushed too far. I am often hailed as a hero in the neighborhood, a title that makes me deeply uncomfortable. I didn't set out to be a crusader. I just wanted to be left alone to grieve and to honor my wife. But when a bully comes onto your land and tries to erase the last piece of someone you love, you can't just stand by. You have to fight back, not with their tools of rage and intimidation, but with your own. My tools were patience, precision, and a deep understanding of how systems work. And water. In the end, it all came down to water. Water always seeks its own level. It will always find the weakness in a structure. It can be a gentle stream or a raging flood that sweeps away everything in its path. Brenda tried to dam up justice, to divert the truth for her own selfish gain. All I did was open the floodgates. Now, the peace I sought has finally returned. I spend my evenings on my porch, looking at Clara's fence, listening to the gentle sound of the water in her memorial pond. The quiet is no longer a heavy, empty presence. It's a peaceful, living thing. And the view is perfect.